Hello and welcome to our 8th grade lab safety discussion. This year, what we're going to have you do is fill in your own Google presentation by looking for the places that have the white dash. When you have a white dash, what you'll do is you'll click in the middle of it, and then you will be able to type in your information or your answers as we go through these presentations. Feel free to add more information if you'd like while we are presenting the information. Our learning target is that we'd like you to discuss and practice the school safety procedures and lab safety expectations for our classroom. Now, we're not sure which classroom you're in, so we're going to keep this somewhat general as far as the statement of saying our classroom. The expectation is you learn the basic expectations and safety information for our room. You'll ask questions for clarification if necessary, and you'll make the information relevant to your needs, whether in our classroom or at home. Now remember, when we're talking about fire and chemicals, make sure that you have parental permission before you work with any chemicals or fire at home. The assignments for this particular mini unit would be the safety signature. This is required to do lab activities, especially the ones dealing with fire and chemicals. The safety notes, you filling in and turning in your student copy of this presentation counts as your safety notes, so you get to type it. And then finally, you need to pass the safety assessment at the end of our discussion, and you have to score at least a proficient score. Otherwise, you will not be able to do the labs dealing with fire and chemicals. So we're going to start with part one. Part one, again, this is about lab safety, is dealing with perception versus reality. So the first thing I have here is just a quick little knowledge check for you. So what I'd like you to do is take a moment and click on the white dash, so right here, and try to answer this question to the best of your ability. What is the difference between perception and reality? The second question I'd like you to answer is, why is it important to know the difference for our science class? What does this have to do with science? What does this have to do with lab safety? So take a little bit of time, pause this video, and type in your answers, please. All right, now that you've got your answers started, we're going to come back to those questions later in this presentation and see if you've changed your mind. If you have the same exact answers because you think you know what's going on, you've got it figured out, then feel free to copy and paste your answers. Maybe you'll want to add a little more. If you were totally off on what you thought compared to what we talk about, then maybe you need to readdress what you wrote and start with new answers when we get to the end. So I have a few quotes here for you. What do these quotes mean, and how do they fit into our discussions? So I'll let you read those quotes, and then I'd like you to just think about them. Think about, what does it mean? Don't believe everything you think. Sounds like a contradiction. Your opinion is your opinion. Your perception is your perception. Do not confuse them with facts or truth. That's a good statement to remember for science. And the last one, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. What do those statements mean? Pause the video and think about it. If you're near someone that you can talk to them about your answers. This is a fun little chart that I like to do. This one drives me crazy because I'm one of the type of people that I'll read this first word and it says yellow. Even though the instructions very clearly state, look at the chart and say the color, not the word. So challenge yourself. Point at one of these and give it a try. So this one would be blue. This is blue. This is black. This is green. Test yourself. See how well you can do. If you have the opportunity, challenge a friend. All right, now this one is a fun one. And so your challenge here is try to figure out where is the odd one in this bunch. So pause the video, take a look at it, and when you're all done, raise your hand. If you're at home working on this and your family members are wondering why you're raising your hand, feel free to share with them too. So now you've had a chance to look at this, and I hope you figured out the odd one is right down here. So I'll let you take a look at that again. Once you've seen it, you'll be like, whoa, how did I miss that? This is a fun one. And depending upon what you're looking at and what your perspective is, and remember, we're talking about perspective versus reality here, you may be in line with this person saying there's 4 things here, or you may be in line with this person saying there are 3 things here. Remember, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And if you're wondering about that, you're like, well, how can it be 4 and 3 at the same time? Here's an answer key for you. It's even color coded. Again, why are perceptions versus reality important in science? This is a fun picture. When you look at this, depending upon your perspective and what you choose to focus on, you may see 2 different images. So I'll let you take a look at this and see if you can see 2 different images of what's going on in this picture. Again, oftentimes in science or in life, we see things, but based on our backgrounds and what we're focusing on and the details we pick up, or whether we're a detail-oriented person or a global perspective person, we may look at the same phenomena, but we may notice different things. So that's what's the fun thing about this. Okay, the next one, this is a classic. What do you see here? Take a moment, discuss it with your partner. For this one, for me, it depends upon whether I'm focusing on the black or whether I'm focusing on the white part of the picture. This one is a little bit creepy, potentially, but then again, it could be a nice, fun little picture. What do you see? Do you see the couple or do you see the skull? Again, it's about perspective. We're all looking at the same picture, but we may see different things. This one I like because it's a challenge. Which center dot is the largest? The grouping on the left or the grouping on the right? If you think one is larger than the other, what could we do to prove which dot is actually the largest? Remember, this is science. In science, we like to collect data. This is a fun one. Again, it's depending upon what your perspective is. Are you more familiar with rabbits or are you more familiar with birds? Depending on which part of this picture you look at, you may see a rabbit or you may see a bird, and once you've seen them both, you can go back and forth between them. This one is one that I have as a t-shirt. I bought this t-shirt years ago. And the question I have for you is, what can we learn from this picture? So here we have Curious George, and we have a bottle that's clearly labeled ether. Now some of you, based on your life experiences, may know what ether is. Some of you may not know what ether is. But based on the picture and your life experiences, or not, you may be able to infer what's happened to Curious George. And I will tell you that no little Curious George monkeys have been killed during the making of this picture. So, the first thing you have to do is figure out what's ether. Now this is an important picture to look at and talk about because oftentimes in the lab, you will see things that are clearly labeled. The problem is, if you work with them, play with them, mess around with them before you're given the safety instructions, you may think it's one thing, but it actually acts another way with you than what you're used to. So for example, ether is often the main component of the starting fluid for large diesel engines. So if you have a background of diesel engines, you would probably say, oh, ether's in starting fluid. You'd be correct. If you are a history buff, you may know about how, or a biology person, you really like biology, you may realize that ether is often used to put insects to sleep for insect collections and to cause them to die. You may also realize that ether at one point in time in our history was used to knock out patients before surgeries. So if you look at this picture, what do you think happened to Curious George? And again, remember I said no monkeys were killed during this picture. Chances are pretty good. Even if Curious George was able to read that bottle that said ether, he probably didn't understand how it was going to interact with him. And that's a challenge we have in our science lab. We need to be careful about that. We also have that challenge at home. You have to be very careful with things that you do at home so you don't accidentally mix together the wrong chemicals. So now we're back to our two questions that we had before. Perception versus reality check for understanding. So I'd like you to take a moment, go back to your original answers, think about what we've talked about here, and try to decide, did your original answers do a good job of explaining the difference between perception and reality? Or through our discussion, have you thought about some other things that would help you come up with better answers for the difference between perception and reality? And the next question again, why is it important to know the difference for our science class? What does this have to do with science? Looking at a picture of a rabbit or a duck, what does that have to do with science? Or a funny picture on the front of a t-shirt of Curious George passing out from sniffing ether, what does that have to do with science? So I'll give you a moment, pause the video, and feel free to copy and paste your answers from above and then change them, or if they're good the way they were, leave them as they were. Now this is what I came up with as my answers for perception versus reality. And for me, I said perception is what we believe or think. And in parentheses I said this may be influenced by our experiences and or biases. Think about the ether. If you've worked with diesel engines, you may realize it's starting fluid, but you may not know that it can also cause you to pass out. But reality is that what is actually happening at that point in time. The reality is, we look at the little picture of Curious George, and he's laying on the back, and the bottle of ether is open, and we can infer that something happened between Curious George and what was in the bottle. The thing is, reality is measurable. We can measure it with facts. So I said the measurable facts of an event or phenomenon is called reality. And why is this important to know the difference for our science class? Well, in science, we don't deal with opinions. Opinions can get to and act as a starting point for doing scientific experiments, but science is about measurable facts. It's not about our opinions. We can use science to back up an opinion, and in that case, we generally call that claims, evidence, reasoning statements, but that's another day. So for lab safety, remember, everyone's responsible. We have to take care of each other, and if you see someone doing something that's unsafe, please let them know that's not safe and help correct them, or at least tell your teacher. Be respectful of yourself, others, and the equipment. Be responsible for yourself and the equipment, and be safe. We're all in this together. We have to take care of each other. Now, this part I'm going to start over in another video because I've been talking for a while. This is just some stuff as far as what you need to know about expectations for behaviors again. So I'll come right back to this in just a moment.